The rain had a particular sound in that corner of Oregon, soft, persistent, and strangely intimate, as if the clouds themselves were whispering secrets they were too ashamed to keep. From the cramped space above the garage, she listened to it the way one might listen to a distant lullaby, though it never soothed her. After 18 years confined to that dim, dust-scented loft, every sound carved itself into her memory with the precision of a blade. The dripping gutters, the shift of pine branches, the low hum of her family's voices drifting through the walls. None of it ever changed enough to make time feel like it was moving. Below her, the family's house sat with the dignity of something preserved for show. Crisp white siding, a porch that always smelled faintly of cedar oil, windows kept spotless by a mother who feared what the neighbors might say about a streak of neglect. Everything had its place, its order, everything except her. She knew the garage better than anyone alive. She knew the way its floorboards creaked at certain temperatures, how the dust motes danced when the sun slipped through the rafters in late afternoon, how a draft crawled in from the north wall during harsh winters. That draft had aged her bones more than the passing years ever did. Yet she endured, because endurance was the one thing no one could take from her. Her family insisted the noises were animals. "Raccoons," her mother would say, brushing flour from her apron as if the matter were trivial. Or maybe a stray cat. Her voice always broke on the word maybe, though no one acknowledged it. Her father, stiff-backed and cold as the metal tools hanging in his workshop, preferred silence over explanations. And the boy, now nearly grown, had been raised to ignore the strange and accept the rehearsed. If he ever questioned the thumps, the soft pacing at night, the faint shifts in the beams above the garage, he kept it buried inside him like a secret no one could afford to name. But she knew they knew, and they knew she knew. The house had become a stage over the years, a place where everyone acted as if life were normal, as if a forgotten daughter weren't breathing just a few feet from where they parked their car. And yet, despite the ache of betrayal, she found herself watching them obsessively, memorizing the rhythm of their days. Through the narrow slits between the boards, she caught glimpses: the mother's forced laughter at the breakfast table, the father's polished shoes leaving for work, the boy's slouched posture as he dragged his school bag across the gravel. Their lives were a constant reminder of everything she had lost and everything she had been denied. The garage air always smelled faintly of gasoline and old wood. She inhaled it deeply, letting it ground her. It reminded her that she was still here, still present, still surviving. Sometimes she traced patterns on the floor with her fingertips, little circles, arcs, invisible constellations that only she would ever understand. She imagined a world where she could step outside and feel grass under her feet without fear, a world where the family did not pretend she was a ghost. At night, when the world quieted, the sounds from the house grew sharper. Arguments muffled behind closed doors, whispered accusations, the mother's sobs, the father's heavy pacing that made dust drift from the rafters, and the boy, always listening, always pretending not to. She knew something in that house was beginning to crack. The tension had a new shape, a new weight. The mother lingered longer in the garage, placing jars on shelves that didn't need organizing. The father locked the car more often, as if an extra click of the key might keep the truth contained. And the boy, he had begun to pause before entering the house, listening to the loft with a puzzled expression, the kind she remembered from when he was very small and still believed in things he could not see. Tonight, as the rain softened and the wind brushed against the eaves, she heard something new. A single, deliberate step on the garage floor below. Slow, cautious, too heavy to be an animal. She held her breath. For the first time in years, someone was standing directly beneath her, and they were not moving. The step below her did not come again. Whoever had paused in the garage seemed to reconsider whatever impulse had led them there, retreating with a quiet shuffle that barely disturbed the dust. Still, the moment left her senses sharpened, as if the years of stillness had suddenly shifted beneath her feet. Something was changing in that house, something that carried the scent of old guilt resurfacing. Morning crept into the loft through thin cracks between the rafters. Pale Oregon light washed across her blankets, revealing the familiar patterns of wear: frayed edges, uneven stitching, a tear she had mended so many times it resembled a scar more than fabric. She rose carefully, her movements silent from a lifetime of practice, and pressed her ear to the wood. The house was already awake. Her mother's voice drifted into the garage first, a voice that once sang, now threadbare with strain. She heard drawers opening, cabinets shutting a bit too hard. The woman was searching for something. She could hear the agitation in every breath. Then came the father's measured tone, brittle with irritation. He didn't ask what she was looking for. He never asked questions he didn't want answered. And then the boy, his footsteps lighter now, almost adult, but not quite. His voice carried the uncertain timbre of someone caught between obedience and suspicion. He asked why the back door had been left open. The mother dismissed it quickly. Too quickly. She pulled back from the boards, her heartbeat steady but deep enough to make her ribs ache. They were unraveling, piece by piece. Memories came to her in fragments throughout the day, not the kind shaped by nostalgia, but by survival. She remembered how cold it had been the first winter they placed her here, the snow piling against the garage door while she shivered under thin blankets. She remembered the father saying it was temporary, just until things settled. She remembered the mother avoiding her gaze, mumbling that it was safer this way, and the boy, just a toddler then, reaching for her with small hands until someone pulled him away. 18 years had not softened those edges. The family clung to their lie the way others clung to prayer. It protected them from judgment, from scandal, from the unbearable truth that they had chosen convenience over compassion. And the town, with its tidy lawns and unspoken rules, had given them the perfect cover. People in small places rarely ask questions that might disturb the quiet. Around noon, the garage door swung open with its familiar metallic groan. She froze, hovering in the dimness. The mother stepped inside, her apron still dusted with flour, though her hands trembled slightly as she rearranged jars on the shelves. She wasn't organizing. She was avoiding her own thoughts, her own memories. The woman looked thinner than the year before, shadows clinging beneath her eyes. She paused once, glancing upward with an expression that might have been dread or longing. It was hard to tell from the sliver of view the loft allowed. "I heard it again last night," the mother whispered to no one, or perhaps to everyone. "It's getting louder." The father's voice cut from outside, calling her back sharply. She flinched, set the jar down too hard, and hurried out. The door closed. Silence returned, but not for long. By late afternoon, the boy came into the garage. He rarely did. His shoulders had broadened. His jawline had sharpened into something that mirrored his father's sternness, though he carried none of the man's confidence. He kept glancing over his shoulder as he stepped inside, as if expecting someone to follow him. When he reached the center of the room, he simply stood there, staring upward. Her breath caught. He shifted, listening. Then he crouched, picking up something from the floor. A small button she had dropped weeks ago. He turned it over in his hand, frowning. Not the frown of a child told to believe a lie, but the frown of someone recognizing a truth long denied. She watched him close his fist around the button and slip it into his pocket. A quiet theft. A silent acknowledgement. When he exited the garage, he did not shut the door all the way. Dusk swept in with a chill that settled into the bones of the old structure. She wrapped her blanket tighter around her shoulders and listened to the nervous cadence of voices from the house. The father was angry about something. The mother was crying again. The boy said nothing. Later, deep into the night when the house had finally fallen still, she heard footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate, approaching the garage. Not just one set this time. Two. They stopped at the door, lingering there in the darkness, as if deciding whether to enter. And then softly the doorknob turned. The doorknob stilled before it could complete its turn. Whoever stood outside hesitated. She could hear the faint intake of breath, the uncertain shuffle of shoes on gravel. Then the handle slipped back into place. The door did not open. But the silence that followed carried a different quality than before. Awareness. Intent. She sensed that the boundary separating her from the world below had thinned, as if the house itself were beginning to acknowledge her presence, after years of pretending she didn't exist. The following morning arrived with a pale, colorless light, Fog clung low to the yard, blurring the outlines of the pine trees and softening the sharpness of the garage roof. She watched through a crack as the father stepped outside, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, his jaw rigid. He scanned the property like a man surveying a battlefield he no longer trusted. His gaze lingered on the garage longer than usual. Inside, she felt something she had not felt in years. A flutter of unease. Not fear. Fear was familiar, manageable. This was different. The sense that the family's fragile equilibrium had reached its breaking point. The mother was quieter that day. She moved through the kitchen in mechanical motions, stirring pots without tasting them, wiping surfaces that were already clean. Her thoughts were elsewhere, circling, gnawing, returning to something she refused to say aloud. When she passed the garage window, she paused, her shoulders tensed, her hands curled against her apron. For a moment, she looked like she might call out to someone. Instead, she hurried inside, shutting the curtain with a sharp, nervous flick. The boy came home late from school. He didn't go straight into the house the way he usually did. Instead, he wandered toward the garage, glancing behind him as if making sure no one was watching. He slipped inside, letting the door close softly behind him. She listened to the sound of his sneakers brushing across the concrete. He stopped beneath her, exactly where he had found the button the day before. She watched him tilt his head, his brow furrowed, his breathing steady but deep. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the button, holding it in his palm as though weighing its meaning. It wasn't an animal, he murmured under his breath. A confession meant only for himself. Her pulse quickened. She moved back, deeper into the shadows of the loft. She knew he couldn't see her, but still she feared that any breath she took might betray her. But the boy didn't climb the ladder or call for anyone. Instead, he closed his hand around the button again and walked out, this time locking the door carefully behind him. By evening, tension had thickened the air inside the house. Dinner was quiet, the clinking of cutlery almost painfully sharp. She could hear every sound through the garage wall. The father's agitated tapping against his glass, the mother's uneven breathing, the boy's silence that stretched like a warning. "What did you find out by the garage?" the father finally asked, voice tight. "Nothing," the boy replied, but his tone lacked conviction. The father pressed. "Are you lying to me, son?" A chair scraped loudly. The mother intervened with a shaky voice, urging them both to eat, insisting the boy was just tired. But the father's suspicion lingered like smoke. She could almost feel it through the walls. The boy left the table early. The father stayed behind, chewing his food as though it were an obligation. The mother washed dishes with trembling hands. Night descended heavy and cold. She wrapped her thin blanket around herself, listening to the murmur of voices from the house. The father and mother were arguing, quiet enough that the neighbors would not hear, but tense enough that every word struck like a spark. "You're losing control," he hissed. "She's not going to stay quiet forever," the mother whispered. The words echoed in her chest like a physical blow. It was the first time she had heard either of them refer to her in so many years. The tone was not affection, not concern, only fear. Hours passed. The argument ended. The house fell silent. Then, long after midnight, she heard footsteps. Light ones, approaching the garage. She crawled forward, peering through the slits in the floorboards. The boy stood in the moonlight, staring up at the loft window. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't confused. He was waiting. And for the first time, she wondered whom he expected to appear. Fog clung to the yard the next morning like a veil refusing to lift. It blurred the edges of the world, making the house, the trees, and the garage seem suspended in a muted, watchful silence. She felt that silence inside her too, a tightening of breath, as if the air had thickened with memories she had tried for years not to recall. The boy had been outside again before dawn. She had heard his steps, lighter than the father's, less hurried than the mother's. He lingered by the garage door, tracing something in the frost with his fingertip. She couldn't see what it was, but she sensed intention in the movement, a quiet claim of curiosity he no longer bothered to hide. When he finally entered the house, he did so without looking back, but she knew he would return. He was closer to the truth than any of them had ever allowed. Inside the home, the morning unfolded with a brittle tension. The mother moved slowly as if each step carried a burden too heavy to bear. Her voice shook when she told the father that she planned to visit town, though neither believed the lie. He didn't object. He only watched her with that rigid, wounded pride that had shaped the household for years. Their marriage, once the foundation of their carefully constructed facade, now felt like a structure held together by splinters and silence. The boy sat at the table, turning a piece of toast over in his hands. He didn't eat it. He kept glancing toward the garage window, his brow furrowed with a confusion that was slowly hardening into resolve. When his father snapped at him to finish breakfast, the boy didn't flinch. He merely asked, "Why don't we tell people the truth?" The entire house seemed to still. The father set his fork down with a sharp clatter. "What truth?" The boy met his eyes, unafraid. "The noises, the things missing. He stopped, swallowing the last word. Not because he feared saying it, but because the weight of it had finally dawned on him. The father stood, the chair legs scraping harshly across the floor. "You will drop this. Do you understand?" But the boy did not nod. His silence was louder than defiance. That afternoon, the mother retreated into the garage alone. She closed the door behind her, leaning against it as though to steady herself. Her breathing was ragged. Her hands trembled. And she whispered something she had never whispered before. "I'm sorry." The words drifted upward like fragile ashes. She froze where she knelt in the loft. Apologies had been absent from her life for nearly 2 decades. Hearing one now, low, broken, sincere, felt like a wound reopening. The mother stayed for several minutes, staring at the floorboards beneath her feet. She reached up once, fingers grazing the low beam as though imagining a hand reaching back. Then she turned and left, wiping her eyes quickly with the corner of her apron. By evening, a storm rolled in. Not rain, wind. Fierce, restless wind that shook the pine trees and pressed against the house with impatient hands. She sat with her blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders, listening as shutters rattled and something metallic clanged against the siding. Through the gusts, she caught fragments of voices inside the home. The parents arguing. Again. The boy's footsteps pacing. Again. But the words carried through the walls with a clarity that made her chest tighten. "She's growing bolder," the father said. "She's not staying quiet. She's lonely," the mother whispered, and there was such raw pain in the word that it startled all 3 of them, though only one heard all of it. "She's a risk," he snapped. There was a pause, a long one. Then the mother asked, almost in a breath, "What if we let her come down?" Something fell in the kitchen, a glass, shattering. The father cursed. The boy rushed in. Panic spread through the house like smoke. "Let her come down." The phrase throbbed in her ears long after the conversation dissolved into frantic blame. She pressed her palm to the wooden boards, feeling the vibration of the storm outside and the even greater storm inside that house. For the first time in years, an image rose in her mind, sunlight on her skin. Not filtered through cracks, not glimpsed through pine shadows, real, open sunlight. She closed her eyes, letting the impossible warmth fill her. But then, footsteps. Quick, tense, moving toward the garage. She opened her eyes. The door below creaked, and someone whispered her name. The sound of her name, soft, barely formed, trembled in the dark like a memory learning to speak again. She pulled herself toward the narrow gaps in the boards, her breath cold against the wooden slats. Below, the garage was swallowed in shadows except for the faint outline of the boy standing just inside the doorway, his hand still on the knob. He whispered her name again. Not a question, a recognition. The wind howled past the roof, shaking loose dust from the rafters. She felt it drift across her skin as she stared down at him, her chest tight with something sharp and unfamiliar. A sensation that resembled hope, but carried too much fear to claim the word. He stepped further inside, closing the door gently behind him. "I know you're here," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor running beneath it. I've known for a while. Not everything, but enough." She pressed her fingers to her lips to quiet her breathing. She had imagined this moment for years, what he might say, how she might respond. But now that it stood before her, it felt unreal, fragile and dangerous. "I found the button," he whispered, "and the drawings on the boards. And the spoon that went missing from the kitchen." He swallowed. "You left those on purpose, didn't you?" She hadn't, not consciously. But perhaps some part of her, buried deep beneath years of enforced silence, had reached out without her knowing. He looked up toward the loft, squinting. "They lied to me," he said. "My whole life." A gust of wind battered the garage, rattling the ladder that led to her hiding place. He startled but didn't retreat. Instead, he moved toward it, placing one foot on the lowest rung. She stiffened. He froze, reading something in the silence. "I won't come up," he said softly. "Not unless you want me to." His restraint startled her. People rarely offered choices to someone who had been denied every one of them. She shifted slightly, a small movement that sent a soft creak through the beams. His face lifted at once, eyes widening, not with fear, but with a kind of grief. "You don't have to stay here," he whispered. "Not anymore. I'll help you." He meant it. She could see that now. The sincerity in his voice, the tension in his shoulders, the quickened rhythm of someone prepared to bear a truth long hidden from him. But sincerity alone was dangerous. Too dangerous. Before she could respond, before she could even process the weight of what he had offered, the garage door slammed open. The father stood there, breath heaving, hair disheveled, eyes burning with something that looked too close to desperation. "Get away from there," he barked, his voice cracking under the strain. The boy turned. "Why? Tell me why." The storm outside seemed to roar louder, as if the world itself waited for the father's answer. He stepped inside, slamming the door shut to drown the wind. "You don't understand," he growled. "This is for the family's protection." "The family?" The boy shot back. "Or your reputation." The words struck like a blow. The father's jaw tightened, his fists clenched. "She was never supposed to stay," the mother's voice whispered from behind him. They hadn't noticed her enter. Her face was pale, streaked with tears. She moved past the father, past the boy, until she stood beneath the loft, staring up at the darkness where she knew her daughter watched. "You were meant to come home," the mother said, voice trembling. "But the town, the circumstances, your father—" She broke off, covering her mouth. "I thought I could fix it someday. I thought I could make it right." The father slammed his hand against the wall. "It's too late for confessions." "No," the mother whispered. "It's too late for silence." Something shifted in the house then, not physically, but in the years of rot that had built up in the family's foundation. The boy stepped beside his mother. The father stood alone. And above them all she felt a crack, small but undeniable, open inside her. The wind surged again, rattling the boards around her, as if urging her toward a choice she had never been allowed to make. Slowly, she moved toward the ladder. Below, 3 breaths caught at once. She placed one hand on the top rung. The wood creaked, and in the dim, trembling quiet, no one knew whether she was coming down or preparing to disappear forever. If this story unsettled you, imagine what other secrets still linger in forgotten American homes. Share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more untold stories, leave a like to support the channel, and send this video to someone who loves dark history as much as you do.